Hello and welcome to the Vailrun Tapes. Every story here is true. It happened to a real person, and they wrote it down or said it out loud, so the rest of us would know. Tonight, I'll share a few of them with you. A lot of you come back here every night, and that means a lot to me. These stories stay with people. That's just what they do. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read all of them. And if you like these stories, a quick like and subscribe really help. Now get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin.
I was driving home late one night when I saw something in the middle of an intersection that I still think about almost every week. It happened less than 200 feet from my house. That is part of what makes it feel so strange. If it had happened miles away on some empty highway or deep out in the country, maybe I could have told myself it belonged to some unfamiliar place. Maybe I could have blamed it on a weird road, a strange town, or a place I would never have to see again. But it happened practically at the end of my street. It happened in an intersection I had passed through countless times. I knew every house around it. I knew which side streets led where. I knew the traffic pattern, the stop signs, the driveways, and the way the streetlights looked at night. It was not an unfamiliar place. It was one of the last ordinary parts of the drive before I got home. That night, I was alone on the road. There were no other cars in the intersection. No one was coming from the opposite direction. No headlights behind me. No pedestrians crossing. No bikes, no people standing on corners, no traffic at all. Just me, my car, the road, and the dark. It was one of those quiet nights where the neighborhood looked almost frozen. Most houses had their lights off. A few porch lights glowed faintly. The street was empty enough that I could see clearly through the intersection without any other headlights interfering. I was close enough to home that I was probably already thinking about getting inside. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was thinking about food, bed, a shower, or whatever people think about during the last few minutes of a normal drive. I was not scared. I was not watching the sky. I was not looking for anything strange. Then, I saw a tiny ball of light appear in the middle of the intersection. At first, it was small, really small, about the size of a grape. It seemed to hover or sit in the middle of the road, right where the lanes crossed. It was bright enough that I noticed it immediately, but it was so small that my first thought was probably that it was some reflection or a piece of something catching my headlights. Maybe it was glass. Maybe it was a reflective object. Maybe it was a tiny piece of metal. Maybe it was a spark from a damaged wire or some strange reflection from a sign. That was what I tried to tell myself at first. But then it started growing. The little point of light became larger and brighter. It did not move away from me like a car light in the distance. It did not travel across the road. It just expanded from the same place in the middle of the intersection, as if something was building up inside it. I remember slowing down or stopping, though I do not remember exactly how quickly. I was too focused on what I was seeing. The ball of light kept growing. It went from grape size to something bigger, maybe the size of a baseball. Then bigger still. The brightness increased with it. At that point, it was no longer something I could easily ignore. It was not a little flicker or a distant flash. It was a solid-looking orb of light sitting in the middle of the intersection, getting larger and more intense by the second. I remember staring at it through the windshield. The road around it began to look different because of how bright it was. The darkness of the intersection started disappearing. The pavement, the curbs, the nearby yards, and the fronts of the houses became visible in the glow. Then it grew to around the size of a basketball. And suddenly, it looked like daylight, not normal streetlight brightness. Not headlights, not the pale glow from a porch lamp. It was bright enough that the whole intersection lit up as though the sun had come up for a second. Everything around it became sharply visible. The houses, the road, the grass, the edges of the sidewalks, the trees nearby. The darkness was gone. It was like a small sun had appeared in the middle of the street. I do not know why, but I felt the immediate need to duck below the dashboard. I did not stop to think about it. I did not tell myself that I should duck. I did not decide logically that it might be dangerous. My body just reacted. Something about the brightness, the size of the light, or the pressure of the moment made me throw myself down below the level of the windshield. I remember lowering my head fast, almost like I was trying to get away from whatever was happening outside. Maybe some part of me thought it was going to explode. Maybe I thought it was lightning. Maybe I thought something was coming through the windshield. Maybe it was just instinct, but I ducked. Then there was a loud pop. Not a long rumble, not a crash that continued, just one sharp, loud pop. And then the light was gone. The intersection went dark again. Everything looked normal. I stayed crouched for a second, trying to figure out whether it was over. My heart was pounding. I remember slowly looking back up, expecting to see smoke, fire, broken glass, a downed power line, a damaged traffic sign, anything that would explain what had just happened. There was nothing. The road was empty. The intersection looked exactly the way it had before. No glowing ball, no fire, no sparks, no smoke, no debris, no damaged streetlight, no car wreck. No evidence that a basketball-sized ball of light had just appeared, grown bright enough to turn night into day, made a loud pop, and vanished. I kept driving. I was only about 200 feet from home, but those last few seconds of driving felt strange. I kept looking back in my mirror. I kept checking the intersection as I pulled away, expecting something else to happen. Nothing did. I parked at my house. For a moment, I just sat in the car. I remember trying to calm myself down and make sense of it. Maybe it was an electrical short. Maybe a transformer blew somewhere nearby. Maybe there was a power line problem. Maybe some kind of electrical arc created the light and the sound. That would make sense. But there were no power lines down. No outage that I noticed. No flickering lights in nearby homes. No obvious flash from a transformer on a pole. And the object had seemed too contained. It was not like a flash high above me. It was right in the middle of the intersection, growing outward in a round shape. Eventually, I got out of the car and looked back toward the intersection. Everything was fine. The street was quiet. The houses were still there. The road was empty. Then I saw one of my neighbors standing at her front door. Her house was right before the intersection. She was outside, or partly outside, looking in the direction of the road with this confused expression. It was obvious she had noticed something too. That was important to me. I had been alone in my car, and I had already started wondering if I somehow imagined the whole thing. The moment was so strange that even while it was happening, it felt unreal. But seeing my neighbor standing there, looking confused and staring toward the intersection, made me feel like I was not the only person who had noticed something. I do not remember whether I spoke to her. Maybe I was too shaken to walk over and ask. Maybe she went back inside before I could say anything. Maybe I did not want to sound crazy. But I remember seeing her at the door, looking toward the exact place where the light had appeared. That detail has stayed with me. The next day, I tried telling a few friends about what happened. I did not expect them to have an answer. I just needed to say it out loud. I needed someone to listen and maybe tell me it sounded like an electrical issue or some weird thing involving power lines. I wanted something normal, something that would make the memory less strange. but they thought I was being dumb. Maybe they laughed. Maybe they told me it was probably headlights or a camera flash. Maybe they acted like I had overreacted to something simple. I do not remember every exact response, but I remember the feeling. They did not really believe me, or at least they did not take it seriously enough for me to keep talking about it. So I tucked it away. I stopped bringing it up. I kept it to myself. But I never stopped thinking about it. Sometimes I wonder whether it was aliens. Sometimes I wonder whether it was some kind of portal or another dimension opening up for a second. Sometimes I wonder whether the light was something alive. Then I feel ridiculous for even thinking that. Other times I try to be practical. Maybe it was flash photography. Maybe someone nearby took a picture with an extremely bright flash, and the light reflected oddly through the intersection. But that does not explain the way it grew from a small point into a basketball-sized ball. It does not explain the loud pop. It does not explain why the entire area lit up like daytime. Maybe it was a power line short. Maybe an electrical transformer popped somewhere close by, and the angle made it look like the light was in the middle of the street. Electrical equipment can make incredibly bright flashes. It can make loud popping noises. It can turn the sky or a neighborhood bright for a moment. That explanation is probably the most reasonable. But I do not remember seeing a pole flash. I do not remember any power going out. I do not remember hearing alarms or seeing repair crews the next day. And I remember the light looking round. Not like a spark shooting from a wire. Not like a flash coming from above. A ball. A growing sphere of light in the middle of the intersection. I have also wondered about ball lightning. I had heard of it before, though I do not know enough about it to say that is what it was. The idea of a glowing orb appearing and disappearing sounds close to what I saw, but I do not remember a storm. I do not remember rain, thunder, or lightning in the area. Maybe weather does not always matter. Maybe it was something electrical in the air. Maybe it was rare and strange, but still natural. That possibility makes me feel better. A rare natural event is still scary, but it is easier to live with than thinking I saw something impossible. Still, nothing about it felt natural at the time. The whole intersection lit up. The light kept expanding. My body told me to duck. Then came the pop. Then everything was normal again. That sequence never leaves me. It is one of those memories that sits in your mind differently from ordinary memories. I can remember the general feeling of hundreds of regular drives home, but they all blend together. I cannot tell you what I saw on most nights, which route I took, what song was playing, or what time I got home. But I remember that one night. I remember the empty intersection. I remember being the only car there. I remember seeing that tiny grape-sized light appear. I remember watching it grow. I remember the moment it became bright enough to make the world look like daylight. I remember ducking below the dashboard without even thinking. And I remember the loud pop. There are a lot of things I wish I had done differently. I wish I had stayed in the car and watched longer. I wish I had gone back to the intersection after it happened and looked more closely. I wish I had asked my neighbor what she saw. I wish I had written down the exact date, time, weather, and details while they were fresh. I wish I had checked the local news the next day to see if there had been a power failure, electrical incident, transformer explosion, or strange weather event. But I did not do any of that. I was scared. I wanted to get home. And when I told people later, they acted like it was nothing. So I kept quiet. That is one of the frustrating things about unexplained experiences. When you do not have proof, other people can dismiss them easily. They were not there. They did not see the light. They did not feel the instinct to duck. They did not hear the pop. They did not see the neighbor standing in her doorway, confused and looking toward the intersection. To them, it becomes a story. To you, it remains a moment that happened. Maybe there is a perfect explanation. Maybe someone who understands electrical systems could tell me exactly what happened. Maybe there was a short in underground wiring. Maybe a transformer flashed behind a tree. Maybe some electrical equipment created a bright arc that appeared round from where I was sitting. Maybe it was an unusual reflection. Maybe the light hit something reflective in the road at just the right angle. Maybe my tired brain exaggerated the scale of it. Maybe fear made the brightness feel larger and longer than it really was. I cannot rule any of that out. But I also cannot forget how real it felt. I can still picture the ball of light growing in the center of the road. I can still see the intersection turning bright. I can still remember the weird silence afterward. And every once in a while, when I drive through an empty intersection at night, I find myself looking at the center of the road, just in case. My brother went to the bathroom and came back like everything was normal. There was nothing about the moment that warned me what was about to happen. He had walked away, used the bathroom, and returned. It was an ordinary movement in an ordinary house, the kind of thing you would never remember if nothing followed it. He came back into the room, and for a second, it probably seemed like the night was continuing the same way it had been. Then he dropped. Everything changed so fast that my mind could barely catch up. 1 second he was standing there, and the next he was on the floor. At first, I did not understand what I was seeing. Your brain does not always accept something terrible immediately. You see someone fall, and part of you expects them to sit back up. You expect them to say they are okay. You expect it to be something simple, something stupid, something that can be laughed off once the shock passes. But he did not get back up. I realized he was overdosing. That realization hit me with a kind of fear I cannot fully explain. It was not just panic. It was the feeling of every terrible thing that had happened in my life coming back at once. I had already lost too many people to death. I had already watched people disappear from my life in ways that never stopped hurting. I knew what it felt like to get that phone call. I knew what it felt like to hear that someone was gone. I knew what it felt like to replay old conversations and wish you had said more, done more, been there at a different time. And in that moment, looking at my brother on the floor, all I could think was that I was not going to lose him, too. Not him. Not in front of me. Not while I was still there to do something. I started yelling for his family members. I was screaming for Narcan. I do not remember exactly what my voice sounded like, but I know it was loud. It was desperate. It was the kind of yelling that does not even feel like it is coming from you. Your body takes over because there is no room for embarrassment, no room for acting calm, no room for wondering whether you are making a scene. Someone needs help. Someone is dying. You need something now. I ran through the house looking for the Narcan. That part is still hard to think about. When you are panicking, time changes. A few seconds can feel endless. Opening a drawer can feel like it takes forever. Looking through a cabinet can feel impossible because your hands are shaking, your mind is racing, and you are trying to remember where something was while your whole body is screaming at you to move faster. I was scrambling everywhere. I was looking through places where it might be. I was calling out. I was trying not to lose it. But the longer I could not find it, the more hopeless I felt. There is a specific kind of fear that comes from knowing there is something that could help, but not being able to get to it fast enough. You know what you need. You know that every moment matters. You know the person you love is on the floor, and you are running around the house feeling useless because you cannot find the one thing that could make a difference. I remember feeling like I was going to pass out. The panic was so strong that it made my body feel weak. I felt dizzy. My heart was racing so hard it felt like it was beating in my throat. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight. I could barely think straight, but I had to keep moving. I kept telling myself, find it, find it, find it. You are not losing him. You are not losing him too. Finally, I found the Narcan. I ran back to him and used it. For a little while, it helped. There was a moment where I felt a tiny bit of relief. The kind of relief that comes so suddenly it almost hurts. You see even the smallest sign that it might be working, and your brain grabs onto it. You think, okay, maybe he is coming back. Maybe this is going to be okay. Maybe I got there in time. But then it started again. The fear came back immediately. It was like being pulled underwater after you had just reached the surface. I had thought I had him. I had thought he was going to be okay. Then I saw that the danger was not over, and I had to run again. I had to find another one. I remember the feeling of moving through the house again, searching, yelling, trying not to fall apart. Everything in me was telling me that I had to hurry. I could not stop. I could not freeze. I could not let panic win, even though panic was trying to take over every part of me. I found another one. I came back. And finally, after what felt like forever, he came around. He got up. He was alive. Even writing that now, I can still feel the weight of those moments. The fear of losing him. The helplessness of not finding what I needed right away. The devastation that started forming in my chest before I even knew whether he would survive. I had already lost too many people. That was the thought that kept repeating in my head. I had already been to funerals. I had already had to hear that somebody was gone. I had already looked at empty spaces where people should have been. I knew what grief could do to a person. I knew how it stayed with you. It did not just happen once and disappear. It stayed in your memories, in songs, in certain places, in random conversations, in the way you looked at the people you still loved. I was not ready for my brother to become another person I had to mourn. I was not going to let that happen without fighting as hard as I could. The whole thing happened so quickly, but it also felt like it lasted forever. That is what emergencies do. Every second stretches out. You remember details you would normally never notice. The sound of your own feet moving through the house. The way your hands shake when you are opening drawers. The feeling of air not reaching your lungs properly because you are breathing too fast. The way everyone's voices sound far away even when they are right next to you. You remember the person on the floor. You remember their face. You remember thinking, please do not die. Please do not die. Please do not die. And when they finally come back to you, you do not feel like celebrating right away. You feel numb. You feel sick. You feel grateful and angry and terrified all at once. You are relieved, but your body is not caught up yet. Your heart is still beating too fast. Your hands are still shaking. Your mind is still stuck in the moment when you could not find what you needed. That was the part that almost broke me. Not only seeing him overdose, not only the fear of death, it was the feeling that I was running out of time and could not move fast enough. I think people sometimes imagine that in a crisis, you become calm and focused like they do in movies. Maybe some people do. Maybe there are people who can immediately take control and think clearly. But for me, it was messy. It was loud. It was frantic. I was terrified. I was trying to remember where things were while my mind kept showing me all the people I had already lost. I was not thinking about anything else. Not work, not school, not what people would say, not whether anyone was watching. Just him. Just keeping him alive. And somehow, he made it. I do not know how much time passed before I could actually breathe normally again. I do not know how long I sat there afterward or what I said to him. I do not know whether I cried right away or held it in until later. Some memories are too intense to stay organized. But I remember the relief. I remember realizing he was alive. I remember that feeling landing in my body like I had been carrying something impossible and could finally put it down for 1 second. I also remember how the whole thing stayed with me afterward. Once you see something like that, you do not go back to being the same person you were before. You cannot unsee someone you love on the floor. You cannot forget how helpless you felt. You cannot erase the sound of your own voice yelling for help or the feeling of searching through a house while you are scared it might already be too late. It changes the way you look at people. It changes the way you think about addiction. It changes the way you react when someone says they are using, struggling, or trying to quit. At the time, I was kind of using too. I was not in a place where I could act like I had everything together. I had my own problems. I had my own pain. I had my own reasons for trying to escape things sometimes. I understood more than I wanted to understand about why people use. I understood that it is not always about partying or being reckless. Sometimes it is about grief. Sometimes it is about trauma. Sometimes it is about not knowing how to sit with your own mind. Sometimes people are just trying to make it through another day. But seeing my brother overdose put something in front of me that I could not ignore. I knew how close it had been. I knew that I had almost watched someone I loved die. I knew I could have become another person somebody had to search for, panic over, and beg to stay alive. That moment did not magically fix everything. Nothing is ever that simple. Getting clean is not one decision that suddenly makes your life perfect. It is not waking up one day and never struggling again. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes facing things you may have spent years avoiding. But eventually, I got clean too. I am proud of that. Not because I think I am better than anybody who is still struggling. I know how hard it can be. I know how easy it is for people to judge someone from the outside without understanding the pain that got them there. I know that people do not always have support, safety, money, health care, stable housing, or someone who knows what to do when things go wrong. But I got clean, and after everything I had seen, I started trying to help people when I could. I try to help people in similar situations because I know what that panic feels like. I know what it is like to look at someone you care about and feel like the world is ending. I know what it is like to be scared you are about to lose another person. I know that addiction does not only hurt the person using, it reaches into families, friendships, homes, and every person who loves someone who is struggling. I do not think anyone should have to go through that alone. I do not think people who overdose are bad people. I do not think people who use are hopeless. I do not think people should be treated like they are disposable because they are hurting themselves. I have seen too much death. I have lost too many people. And I know that sometimes the difference between life and death is one person refusing to give up. That night, I refused to give up on my brother, even when I was panicking, even when I could not find the Narcan fast enough, even when I felt like I was going to pass out from fear, even when I thought I might be too late. I kept running. I kept looking. I kept yelling. I kept trying. And he lived. There are a lot of people I wish I could have saved. There are people I still think about all the time. People who should have gotten to see another morning. People who should have been able to grow older, laugh more, make new memories, and have the chance to change their lives. Some of them never got that chance. Some of them are gone now. And no matter how much time passes, there is always a part of me that wishes things had been different. I wish someone had been there. I wish somebody had known what to do. I wish they had one more minute, one more chance, one more person who could have helped them. That is why I try to be there for people now. Because I know what it means to almost lose someone. I know what it means to get them back. And I know that every person who is still here has another chance to see today. Rest in peace to all my homies who did not get to see it. I was driving on a country road around 3 in the morning when my car suddenly shut down completely. It was one of those roads that did not really feel like it belonged to the town yet. The land had recently been incorporated, but almost nothing had been built there. It was supposed to become a subdivision eventually, but at the time it was mostly empty stretches of road. Lots marked out for future homes, patches of trees, open dirt, and long dark spaces where there should have been houses but were not. There were only a few houses scattered around. Most of the road was undeveloped. During the daytime, it probably would not have looked especially strange. You would see wide lots, unfinished roads, maybe construction signs, maybe land that had been cleared but not built on yet. It would have looked like one of those places where people knew development was coming, but nobody had really moved in. At 3 in the morning, though, it felt completely isolated. There were no streetlights where I was. No houses close enough to have porch lights shining through the trees. No gas station nearby. No open business. No traffic. No other cars passing in either direction. Just the road, the darkness, and whatever was outside the reach of my headlights. I do not remember where I had been coming from, but I remember being tired. Not necessarily falling asleep at the wheel tired, but tired enough that I was ready to be home. I was driving slowly, probably because the road was dark and unfamiliar enough that there was no reason to rush. The road was quiet. The kind of quiet where you hear your own tires more than anything else. You notice the soft hum of the engine. You notice the small vibration in the steering wheel. You notice every little sound your car makes because there is nothing else around to cover it up. I was just driving. Then the car started slowing down. At first, I thought maybe I had taken my foot off the gas without realizing it. Maybe I was coasting. Maybe I had drifted onto a rough part of the road. But the car kept losing speed. I pressed the gas. Nothing happened. The engine did not respond. The dashboard lights went out. The headlights went out. Everything went black. Not dim. Not flickering. Not like the battery was weak or the headlights were slowly fading. Everything just shut off. The entire vehicle went dark. For a second, I did not even understand what had happened. One moment, I was driving down a dark country road. The next moment, I was sitting in total darkness, with no lights, no engine sound, no dashboard, no radio, and no clear way to tell exactly where I was on the road. The car was still moving, but only barely. It rolled slowly forward. I remember realizing that I had no brakes. I pressed the brake pedal, but there was no normal response. The car was not speeding out of control or doing anything dramatic. It was just gliding forward with whatever momentum it had left, slowing down more and more until it finally rolled to a stop. Then there was nothing. No engine, no lights, no phone, no sound from the car at all. I sat there in the dark. The first thing I thought was not even fear. It was frustration. This is gonna suck if I have to walk. That was honestly my first thought. I was in the middle of nowhere, or at least it felt like nowhere. I had no idea how far I was from anything. I did not know if there was a house within walking distance. I did not know how long it would take to reach a main road. I did not know whether I would have to walk back through empty lots and dark roads just to find someone awake. I reached for my flip phone. It was dead. Of course it was. At the time, flip phones did not have batteries that lasted forever, especially if you had forgotten to charge them or had been out all night. But it felt too convenient in the worst possible way. The car was dead. The lights were dead. The phone was dead. I was sitting alone on an undeveloped country road at 3 in the morning with no obvious way to call anyone. I remember looking around. There was almost nothing to see. Without the headlights, the road disappeared into darkness. I could barely make out the shape of the trees or the edges of the land around me. The sky may have had a little moonlight, or maybe there was enough distant glow from the town to keep it from being completely black, but it was still dark enough that I could not see much beyond the car. I looked through the windshield. Nothing. I looked out the side windows. Nothing. I checked the mirrors. Nothing. No other headlights. No people walking. No house lights. No movement. But then I got that feeling. The kind that starts low in your arms and travels upward before it reaches the back of your neck and the top of your head. Goosebumps, that sudden chill that makes your whole body react before you have even decided that something is wrong. It was not because I saw someone. I did not see anyone. It was not because I heard a voice or footsteps. I did not hear anything. It was just the feeling that I was not as alone as I should have been. The feeling made me sit up straighter in the driver's seat. I remember trying to calm myself down. I told myself I was just nervous because the car had died. Anyone would be nervous. Anyone stuck on an empty road in the middle of the night would get a strange feeling. The dark does that to you. Silence does that to you. Once the headlights go out, the space around you suddenly feels much bigger than it really is. Maybe I was just scared of being stranded. Maybe I was cold. Maybe I was tired. Maybe my body was reacting to the sudden stop and the silence. But the feeling did not go away. It was the kind of chill that almost feels physical, like your body is warning you to pay attention. It came over me strong enough that I got a little shake from it, not because I chose to shake, but because it was automatic, like a sudden tremor running up through your arms, shoulders, and head. I stayed in the car. There was no way I was getting out. Not at 3 in the morning. Not with no lights, not with no phone, not with no idea what was around me. I did not even want to open the door. The car may have been dead, but at least it was still a barrier between me and whatever was outside. I was safer inside than walking down the road in complete darkness. So I sat there. I tried to make a plan. Maybe I would wait until dawn. Maybe another car would pass eventually. Maybe I could walk back the way I came and find a house. Maybe I could knock on someone's door. Maybe I could get enough signal or battery from the phone somehow, though I knew that was not likely. Maybe the car would start again if I waited. I remember sitting there for about 3 minutes. It could have been less. It could have been more. Time feels different when you are stuck somewhere dark and alone. 3 minutes can stretch into what feels like half an hour when you are listening for every little sound outside your car. I kept checking the windows. Nothing. I kept waiting for my eyes to adjust. Nothing. I kept expecting to see a shape near the road or a car coming in the distance. Nothing. The whole world around me felt paused. Then, without warning, the car came back on. The dashboard lit up. The headlights came on. The engine started running again. Everything worked. Just like that. There was no struggle. No weak clicking sound. No coughing engine. No warning lights that stayed on. No obvious sign that anything had happened. The car simply came back to life as if it had never shut down. The strangest part was that it was still in drive. I had not shifted it into park. I had not turned the key off and back on. I had not restarted the engine in the normal way. It was still in drive, exactly as it had been when the car died. The engine was running. The lights were back. The brakes worked. The dashboard worked. Everything was normal again. For a second, I just sat there staring at the controls. I did not understand it. I probably should have checked more carefully. I probably should have turned the car off and tried to restart it. I probably should have tested the brakes, checked the battery, checked the lights, or waited to see whether it happened again. But I did not. I just wanted to get out of there. I put my foot on the gas and drove. I drove away as fast as I safely could. I did not stop to look around. I did not pull over to check the engine. I did not wait to see if the car would die again. I did not turn around. I just got the heck out of there. The road felt different on the way back. Every tree looked like it might be hiding something. Every empty lot felt too wide. Every dark space beyond the headlights made me nervous. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see another car behind me or some figure standing in the road. But there was nothing. I made it home. The car worked normally. Nothing else happened, and I never told anyone. I do not know why I kept it to myself. Maybe because I knew it sounded strange. Maybe because I did not have a real explanation and did not want people to laugh. Maybe because telling someone would make it feel more real. Sometimes, if you keep something to yourself, you can almost convince yourself it was not as weird as it felt. Maybe I thought the car had simply had an electrical issue. That is the most logical explanation. Cars can do strange things. Batteries die. Connections come loose. Ignition systems fail. A car can lose power, stall, and then start again later. Maybe something with the electrical system briefly cut out. Maybe a loose battery cable shifted and then settled back into place. Maybe the alternator had a problem. Maybe the ignition had a fault. Maybe something was wrong with the car that I never noticed again. That is all possible. But it does not fully explain what happened. The whole vehicle shutting down while still moving. The brakes not responding normally. The car rolling to a stop. The phone being dead at the same time. The feeling of being watched. Then the car suddenly turning back on while still in drive, with everything functioning perfectly. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe I was tired enough that I remembered it more dramatically than it happened. Maybe the brakes were still working but felt different because the engine had shut off and power steering or brake assist was gone. Maybe the car did not turn back on by itself the way I remember. Maybe I did something without realizing it. Moved the key, touched the ignition, or caused the connection to come back. Memory can be strange, especially when fear is involved. But I remember sitting there. I remember the dark. I remember the road disappearing in front of me. I remember thinking about how bad it would be if I had to walk. I remember reaching for my dead flip phone, and I remember the chill. That is the part I cannot explain away as easily. You can explain a stalled car. You can explain a dead phone. You can explain an isolated road at night making someone nervous. But there was something about that moment that felt different. It was not just that I was stranded. It was the feeling that the car had stopped for a reason. The road was empty. There were no lights. There was no one around. And for those few minutes, sitting in complete darkness, I felt like something outside was aware of me. I never saw anything. I never heard anything. Nothing touched the car. No one knocked on the window. No strange figure appeared in the headlights when they came back on. That almost makes it worse. There was no proof of anything. Just a feeling. Just silence. Just the sudden awareness that I was sitting alone in a dead car on a road where nobody would find me for a long time. Then everything started working again. I have thought about it since then, especially when driving late at night. Whenever I am on a dark road with no streetlights, I remember that feeling. Whenever my phone battery gets low, I remember reaching for the flip phone and seeing that it was dead. Whenever my car makes a strange noise or the dashboard flickers, I remember the whole vehicle going black. Maybe it really was only a mechanical problem. That is probably what it was. But I have never forgotten how fast it happened, how completely everything shut down, and how normally it came back. The car did not slowly recover. It did not struggle. It did not give me an answer. It just stopped me in the middle of an empty road at 3 in the morning, left me sitting in darkness long enough to feel that something was wrong, then turned back on and let me leave. I never went back to that road at night, unless I had to. And I never told anyone what happened. Not until now. When I was 9 years old, I saw the shadow of a man on my ceiling. Not a vague shape that could have been anything. Not a shadow from a coat hanging somewhere, or a tree branch moving outside the window. It looked like the full-body shadow of a grown man, stretched across the ceiling above me, as if someone was standing somewhere in the room and blocking a light. The problem was that there was nobody there who could have made it. I was in my room with my brother. He was across the room from me, sitting on his phone and doing his own thing. I do not remember exactly what time it was when I first noticed the shadow, but it was late. Late enough that the room was dark, except for whatever small light was coming from outside. Maybe a street light through the window. Maybe the glow from my brother's phone. Maybe some dim light from another part of the house. At that age, nighttime always made a room feel different. In the daytime, my room was just my room. It had normal things in it: my bed, clothes, toys, whatever random stuff a kid collects. But at night, once the lights were off and everyone was supposed to be asleep, everything changed shape. The corners got darker. Furniture looked taller. Small sounds became louder. Still, I was used to being in my room at night. I knew what it looked like. I knew what the ceiling looked like. I knew where the light came from and which shadows belonged to which objects. That was why this one scared me so much. I was lying there, probably trying to fall asleep or just staring up because I was not tired yet, when I noticed something moving on the ceiling. At first, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me. When you stare at a dark ceiling for too long, you can start seeing shapes in the shadows. Your brain tries to make sense of random darkness. A patch of shadow can look like a face. A wrinkle in a curtain can look like a person standing in the corner. But this did not look random. It was shaped like a man. I could make out the outline of a head, shoulders, torso, arms, and legs. It was not perfectly sharp, but it was clear enough that my first thought was not. That is a shadow from a lamp. My first thought was, there's a man above me. The shadow stretched across the ceiling in a way that made no sense. It looked like a person was standing somewhere near the bed or close to the wall, with a light behind them, casting their silhouette upward. But there was no person standing there. There was no light source positioned in a way that could make that shape. There was no one else in the room except my brother, and he was across from me. I stared at it for what felt like a long time. The strange thing was that I did not immediately scream. I think I was too confused at first. I kept trying to understand what I was seeing. I looked from the ceiling to the walls, trying to find the source of the shadow. I looked toward my brother. He was still on his phone, not paying attention to me. I looked back up. The man-shaped shadow was still there. I remember feeling my stomach drop. There is a specific kind of fear that happens when you see something that your brain cannot fit into a normal explanation. You do not know whether to move, whether to look away, whether to call for someone, or whether you should pretend you never saw it. I tried to get my brother's attention. At first, I probably said his name quietly because I did not want to sound scared. He did not look up. He was focused on his phone. I said his name again. Still nothing. I remember getting more nervous because the shadow was still there, stretching across the ceiling above me. Then I said his name louder. I told him to look at the ceiling. He finally looked up. And that was when something even stranger happened. Before he could fully react, another shadow appeared. This one was different. It did not look like a full human body. It was darker and larger, almost like a heavy patch of darkness moving across the ceiling. It came over the man-shaped shadow and completely covered it. For a second, the original shadow was gone beneath it. Then both shadows disappeared. Just like that. The ceiling was empty again. My brother had seen enough to know something had happened, but I do not know if he saw every detail the same way I did. I remember being desperate for him to confirm it, because I did not want to be the only person who had seen it. I wanted him to say, yeah, I saw that. I wanted a normal explanation. I wanted him to tell me it was a reflection, a shadow from his phone, a car passing outside, anything, but no explanation came. The room just went back to normal. The ceiling looked like a ceiling again. The shadows were gone. And somehow that made it worse. Because once something disappears without explanation, you start wondering whether it can come back. That night, I could not sleep facing the ceiling anymore. It sounds silly now, but when you are 9 years old and you have just seen what looks like a full-grown man's shadow above your bed, the ceiling becomes the worst place to look. I remember trying to turn onto my side, facing away from the top of the room. I pulled my blanket close to my face and tried not to look up. But every time I closed my eyes, I thought about it. The shape of the man, the way it stretched across the ceiling, the way another shadow swallowed it whole, the fact that my brother had been right there in the room. For a long time after that, I hated falling asleep flat on my back. I did not like looking at ceilings in dark rooms. I did not like seeing shadows on walls. Even something ordinary, like headlights passing outside or a tree branch moving against the window, could make me sit up and look around. I kept wondering if I had imagined it. Maybe I had been tired. Maybe I had stared at the ceiling too long. Maybe my eyes had adjusted strangely to the darkness. Maybe the light from my brother's phone had created a shape on the ceiling, and my brain made it look like a person. That is possible. Kids see strange things in the dark all the time. A room can be familiar in the daytime and look completely wrong at night. Shadows can stretch and shift in ways that seem impossible when you are half asleep. Maybe it had been something ordinary, and fear had filled in the details. But the fact that my brother looked up at the exact moment the second shadow covered the first one made it difficult to dismiss completely. I did not tell a lot of people about it after that. I think I knew even then that people might laugh. It is hard to explain something like that without sounding like you are making it up. What are you supposed to say? There was a man on my ceiling, not a man in the room, not a person hiding in the house. A shadow of a full-body man stretched across the ceiling with no body attached to it. Even saying it out loud sounds ridiculous, so I mostly kept it to myself. A couple of months later, I was staying at my uncle's house. I do not remember why I was there. Maybe it was a sleepover, maybe a family visit, maybe I was staying over for a weekend. I only remember that it was very early in the morning, around 4 o'clock, and I woke up suddenly. The room was dark, not completely black, but dark enough that the walls were mostly shadows. I could still see the rough outlines of furniture, the doorway, and whatever light was coming in from outside. Maybe there was a street light. Maybe moonlight came through a window. It was enough light that objects had shapes, but not enough to make the room feel safe. I woke up and looked toward the wall. That was when I saw it again. This time, it was not on the ceiling. It was on the wall. It looked like a stretched-out shadow of a man. The shape was long and distorted, like something had cast it from an impossible angle. It had the rough outline of a human figure, but it was stretched so far that it did not look right. The head seemed too long. The body seemed too narrow. The limbs looked extended and warped across the wall. It was like someone had taken the shadow of a person and pulled it until it no longer matched a human body. And once again, there was no possible way for it to be there. I remember looking around the room for a source. I looked toward the doorway. I looked toward the window. I looked at the furniture. I tried to understand whether someone was standing outside the room or whether a light was shining in through some strange angle. But there was nothing. No person. No movement. No light source that could make a full, stretched-out man-shaped shadow appear on the wall. It was just there. For a moment, I did not move. I had already had one experience a couple months earlier, and seeing something similar again made me feel like I was trapped in the same nightmare. My first thought was not that it was a person. My first thought was, it is happening again. That made it worse than the first time. The first time, I could still tell myself I had imagined it. I could say it was a trick of light. I could say I was tired. I could say I had stared at a shadow too long. But now I was in a different house, a different room, at a different time. And there was another shadow shaped like a man where no man could possibly be. I remember feeling completely helpless. I did not want to move. I did not want to make noise. I did not want to call out because I was scared that something might answer me. I wanted to wake up, but I was already awake. Or at least I felt awake. That is one of the reasons these memories still bother me. There is always the possibility that I was dreaming. Maybe I woke up inside a dream. Maybe I was in that weird state between sleeping and waking where your brain can create images that look real. But it did not feel like a dream. I remember the room. I remember the darkness. I remember looking at the wall and trying to find a reason for the shadow. I remember being too scared to take my eyes off it. I do not remember how long it lasted. Maybe it only lasted a few seconds. Maybe it stayed there until I pulled the blanket over my head. Maybe I looked away, and when I looked back, it was gone. Time gets strange when you are terrified. A few seconds can feel like 10 minutes. A minute can feel like an entire night. Eventually, morning came. And like with the first incident, everything looked normal again. The wall was just a wall. The room was just a room. There was no stretched-out man-shaped shadow. No impossible silhouette. No explanation. After that, I started paying more attention to shadows than I ever had before. I would look at how light hit walls. I would notice where lamps were placed. I would watch shadows move when cars drove past outside. I would see if a tree branch could create a shape that looked like a person. I think part of me was trying to prove that what I saw had a normal explanation. And sometimes, shadows do look weird. A person can make a long shape across a wall if a light is low enough. A lamp can make furniture look like a figure. A curtain can turn into a face. A coat hanging on a door can look like someone standing there. I know all that. But I also know what I saw did not seem to come from anything. The first shadow was a full-body man on my ceiling. The second was a stretched-out man on the wall at my uncle's house. Neither one should have been there. Neither one had an obvious source. And both of them happened in the middle of the night, when the whole world felt silent and strange. Maybe it was sleep-related. Maybe I had vivid dreams that overlapped with waking. Maybe I had hypnopompic hallucinations, where your brain is still partly dreaming even after your eyes open. That could explain why the shadows felt so real. It could explain why the room looked normal, but one impossible thing was there. That is probably the most logical explanation. But it does not fully explain why my brother was there for the first one. It does not explain why he looked up and saw something at the same time. It does not explain why the second shadow happened in another house. And it definitely does not explain why, even now, I still feel uncomfortable when I am lying in bed and see a long shadow crawl across a wall or ceiling. Hallways are one thing. Closets are one thing. But ceilings are worse. When you are lying down, you are supposed to feel safe because you are in your own bed. You are supposed to be able to look up and see nothing but the ceiling above you. But after that first night, I learned that even the ceiling can feel like a place where something is waiting. The strange part is that I do not even remember a face. Neither shadow had a face. Neither one had eyes. Neither one made a sound. They were just shapes, a full-body shadow of a man. Then another shadow that swallowed it. Then months later, a stretched-out figure on a wall where no figure should have been. That is somehow scarier than seeing something clear. A face might give you an answer. A person might give you a reason. But a shadow has no explanation. It is supposed to belong to something. It is supposed to be caused by a person, an object, or a light. When you see a shadow without knowing what is making it, your mind starts filling in the blanks. And sometimes, the blanks are worse than anything you could actually see. Even now, when I think about those nights, I get that same feeling I had as a kid. That cold, heavy feeling in my chest. The feeling of not wanting to look up, but knowing I have to. The feeling of seeing something impossible and waiting for someone else to confirm it. I still do not know what those shadows were. Maybe they were dreams. Maybe they were tricks of light. Maybe they were something my mind created because I was afraid of the dark. Or maybe there was something in those rooms that I could not see directly. Something that only showed itself as a shape. I honestly do not know. But I do know that after seeing a man-shaped shadow on my ceiling at midnight and another impossible shape on a wall at 4 in the morning, I stopped being able to look at shadows the same way again. Story 3. When I was a kid, I went on a trip to Gettysburg like a lot of kids do. I do not remember exactly whether it was a school trip, a family trip, or one of those organized youth group outings where adults try to make history feel more real by taking everyone to the place where it happened. I only remember that I was around 12 years old, and that the day started out genuinely fun. Gettysburg was one of those places I had heard about before going there. Even as a kid, I knew it was important. I knew there had been a huge battle there during the Civil War, and that people came from all over to see the fields, monuments, old buildings, and famous landmarks. But knowing something in a textbook and actually standing there are two completely different things. When you are there, the place feels much bigger than you expect. There are wide open stretches of land, long roads, thick patches of trees, stone monuments, and places where you can look out across the landscape and imagine how far people must have been able to see. It does not feel like a normal park. Even when tourists are around, there is something quiet about it. You can see a field full of grass and trees and know that something terrible happened there a long time ago, even if you do not fully understand it yet. That day had been hot from the moment we arrived. Not just warm, not just the kind of summer day where you complain a little and then get used to it. It was miserable heat. June can be brutal when the sun is out, but the day before had rained, and the humidity made everything worse. The air felt heavy and wet. The kind of humid heat where your clothes stick to you almost immediately and you feel sweaty even if you are standing still. Walking around in it felt exhausting. Everyone was thirsty. People kept looking for shade. Even the adults seemed tired. I remember the sun being bright enough that the open parts of the battlefield looked almost washed out. The grass was bright, the sky was pale, and the air seemed to shimmer above the ground. By the middle of the day, our group had made it to Devil's Den. That was one of the places I had been looking forward to seeing because it looked different from the rest of the battlefield. Instead of just fields and monuments, there were huge rocks and boulders piled around the area. Some were big enough to climb on. Others created little gaps and shadows between them. It felt more rugged and wild than the open battlefield areas we had been through earlier. At 12 years old, the rocks were probably more exciting to me than the history. Everyone was tired by then. We were thirsty, overheated, and ready to take a break. So our group found some shade near the rocks and sat down for a while. People pulled out water bottles, wiped sweat off their faces, and tried to cool down. The adults probably used the time to make sure nobody was getting sick from the heat. I remember sitting there in the shade and feeling relieved to be out of the sun for a few minutes. The rocks gave the area a strange kind of shelter. There were shadows everywhere, some deep enough that they seemed almost black compared to the bright sunlight outside. You could hear people talking nearby, but the sounds were softer around the boulders. The heat was still there, pressing down on everything, but at least we were not standing in the middle of an open field. After resting for a bit, I climbed up onto some of the rocks. I wanted to look out over the scenery. From where I was, I could see more of the battlefield. There were trees in the distance and open land beyond them. It was one of those views that made you stop for a second, even as a kid, because you could understand why people came to see it. The landscape was beautiful in a quiet way. The trees looked dark against the bright sky, and the fields stretched out farther than I expected. I was just looking around when I saw him. At first, I thought he was a reenactor. That was the obvious explanation. Gettysburg has reenactors. People dressed in Civil War uniforms, stand around historic sites, talk to visitors, and help make the history feel more immediate. I had seen people in period clothing before, or at least I expected to see them at a place like Gettysburg. So when I saw a man in a gray Confederate uniform standing off near the trees, I did not think anything was strange right away. He looked youngish, maybe in his 30s. He had a thick beard that looked brown, though I thought I could see some gray in it too. It was not a short, neat beard. It looked full and heavy, the kind that stood out immediately against his face. I remember it because it seemed so real. It looked detailed enough that I could see the color and shape from where I was standing. His uniform was gray, not bright gray or clean-looking, more like a dull, worn gray. It looked like the kind of Confederate uniform you would expect a reenactor to wear. It had a military look to it, though I could not have described every button or seam at the time. I just knew what I was looking at. A man in what looked like a Civil War uniform. I watched him for a few seconds. He was standing near the trees, looking out over the area. At first, I assumed he was doing some kind of performance. Maybe he was waiting for a group of tourists. Maybe he was supposed to stand there and look dramatic. Maybe he was taking a break from interacting with people. But the longer I watched him, the stranger it felt. He moved, but only from the waist up. His head would turn slightly. His shoulders shifted. His upper body moved as if he was looking around or taking in the view. But his legs never seemed to move. They stayed planted in the same place. That was what caught my attention. At first, I thought maybe he was just standing still. People stand still all the time. But it was different than that. It was almost like the top half of him was alive and moving naturally, while the lower half was frozen in place. I remember staring at him and trying to figure out why it looked wrong. Maybe the rocks were blocking part of his legs. Maybe brush or tall grass made it seem like he was not moving. Maybe he had one foot behind a tree root, or was standing in a dip in the ground. I kept trying to explain it because I still thought he had to be a reenactor. But something about him did not fit. He did not seem to be talking to anyone. He did not wave. He did not walk around. He did not act like someone putting on a show for tourists. He just stood there, looking around. The heat was awful, and I remember thinking that it was strange for someone to be standing out there in a full wool-looking uniform on a day like that. Even if he was a reenactor, it seemed unbearable. Everyone in our group was sweating in regular summer clothes. The adults were complaining about the humidity. We had all stopped in the shade because the heat was so intense. But this man was standing out in the open near the trees, dressed in a heavy, old-fashioned uniform. I watched him for a little longer. Then I called my friend over. I wanted someone else to see him. I do not think I was scared yet. I was curious. I wanted to point out the reenactor because it seemed interesting, and maybe I wanted confirmation that the way he was standing looked strange. I remember calling my friend's name and telling them to come look. My friend came over to where I was on the rocks. By the time they got there, the man had turned toward the woods. He was facing away from us now. I pointed him out. There, I said, or something like that. That guy, my friend looked. And then the man turned. He turned toward us in a way that felt deliberate. Not like he had randomly looked around and happened to face our direction. It felt like he knew we were watching him. Like he had heard me point him out. Like he had noticed two kids standing on the rocks looking at him. For a second, he faced us. I remember the beard. That is the detail that has stayed sharpest all these years. It was thick and brown, maybe with gray in it, and it looked so real. It reminded me of the kind of beard you see in old Civil War photographs, but fuller and darker. In my memory, it looked a little like Robert E. Lee's beard, except brown and thicker. The image of that beard is clearer to me than the rest of his face. He did not smile. He did not raise a hand. He did not say anything. He just turned and faced us. It felt like acknowledgement. Like he had seen us seeing him. Then he walked toward a tree. There was a tree near where he stood, and he moved in that direction. I expected him to pass behind it. I expected him to come out on the other side, maybe walk farther into the woods, maybe join other reenactors, maybe disappear from view because of the tree line. But he did not come out. He walked toward the tree and disappeared. Not disappeared in the normal way where someone goes behind a trunk and keeps walking. Not disappeared because he blended into the woods. He was there. He moved toward the tree. Then he was gone. I stared at the area where he had been. I waited for him to step out from behind the trunk. Nothing. I waited for him to appear farther down the tree line. Nothing. I looked for movement in the woods. Nothing. There was nowhere obvious he could have gone that quickly. The tree was not huge enough to hide a grown man forever. The brush was not thick enough that he could simply vanish in one or two steps without making some kind of movement visible. But there was nothing there. My friend saw it too. That is what makes me keep thinking about it. If I had been alone, I could easily say it was the heat. I could say I was 12 years old, dehydrated, tired, and standing in the sun on one of the hottest days of the summer. I could say my brain took a shadow, a person in the distance, or some ordinary shape near the trees, and turned it into a soldier. That would be the reasonable explanation. Maybe I was dealing with heat exhaustion. Maybe I was not drinking enough water. Maybe the humidity had made me feel dizzy and disconnected. Maybe I had stared at the battlefield for too long, thinking about Civil War soldiers, and my mind created exactly what I expected to see. That is possible. But my friend saw him too. My friend saw the man in the gray uniform. My friend saw the beard. My friend saw him turn toward us. And my friend saw him disappear by the tree. We talked about it afterward, though I do not remember every word. I remember both of us being confused. We probably looked toward the woods for a while. We may have pointed him out to someone else, but by then he was gone. Maybe we told adults. Maybe they assumed it was a reenactor and did not think much of it. Maybe we did not say anything because we knew it sounded strange. I do not know. What I do know is that I could not stop thinking about it for the rest of the day. Every time we moved to another part of the battlefield, I looked toward the trees. I looked for gray uniforms. I watched for reenactors. I kept expecting to see that same man again, standing somewhere just outside the group, watching the fields. But I never did. There were probably tourists around. There may have been reenactors elsewhere. But I never saw him again. The man near the tree was the only one who stood out. Years later, I have thought about it many times. Gettysburg is one of those places where people expect to see something strange. It has so much history, so much death tied to the land, and so many stories that it is easy for your imagination to take over. People go there looking for ghosts. They take photographs and look for strange shapes. They walk through old fields and feel uneasy. They tell stories about soldiers, voices, smoke, footsteps, and figures in the distance. I understand that. I also understand how easy it is for a kid to see something that feels bigger than it really is. The heat alone could have affected me. It was June, it had rained the day before, and the humidity was awful. I was tired, thirsty, and standing on hot rocks in the middle of the day. Heat exhaustion can make people dizzy, confused, weak, and disoriented. It can make your vision feel strange. It can make your thoughts slow down. It can make ordinary things look unreal. I cannot rule that out. But the reason I cannot fully dismiss it is because it did not feel vague. The beard did not feel vague. The uniform did not feel vague. The way his upper body moved while his legs remained planted did not feel vague. The way he turned toward us felt intentional. And most of all, my friend saw him too. If I had only said I saw a Confederate soldier, my friend could have nodded because they knew what I was talking about. But they noticed the beard. They saw that he was there. They saw him face us. They saw him move toward the tree. That makes it harder to write it off as a simple heat-related hallucination. Maybe we both saw a real reenactor. That is another possibility. Maybe he was part of some event happening somewhere nearby. Maybe he was standing still for a photo, a film, a reenactment, or a demonstration. Maybe he walked behind the tree and went down a path that we could not see. Maybe the terrain hid him better than I remember. Maybe the heat and the distance made him seem more mysterious than he was. That explanation makes sense too. But even then, I still wonder why he was alone, why he was standing so still, why he did not seem to move normally, why he turned toward us at the exact moment I pointed him out, and why he disappeared so completely behind one tree. The whole thing had a feeling to it. That is the part I cannot explain. It did not feel like seeing someone on a normal day. It felt personal. I do not mean that I think the figure knew me or was trying to communicate. I do not think it was necessarily a ghost who chose us for some reason. But there was something about the way he looked toward us. He seemed to acknowledge that we were there. Then, he was gone. Maybe it was the atmosphere of the place. Maybe it was the history. Maybe the heat made the whole moment feel more intense than it really was. Maybe I saw a reenactor, and my memory turned an ordinary encounter into something supernatural because I was 12 years old and at Gettysburg. I cannot say for sure. But when I think back to that day, I do not just remember the heat. I remember the thick humidity. I remember sitting in the shade at Devil's Den with everyone complaining about how thirsty they were. I remember climbing up onto the rocks to look over the battlefield. I remember the gray uniform. I remember the brown and gray beard. I remember thinking he had to be a reenactor. I remember calling my friend over. And I remember the moment he turned toward us, walked toward a tree, and disappeared. That is why it has stayed with me. Maybe it was heat exhaustion. Maybe it was a trick of light. Maybe it was a reenactor who knew the area better than we did. Or maybe, for a few seconds, in the middle of a brutal June day, my friend and I saw someone who had no business still standing on that battlefield.
Quick pause, then we're right back. A lot of people watch one story and leave, but some stick around. They hit subscribe and come back every night. If you want to be one of them, the button's right there. Turn on the bell too, so you never miss a new one. That's it. Let's get back to the story.
When I was in college, I had a strange encounter that I still think about sometimes, even though nothing dramatic ever happened afterward. At the time, it did not seem like a big deal. It was one of those random interactions you have when you are young and alone in public. Someone asks for help, you try to be polite, and then you move on with your day. College was full of small moments like that. People asked for directions, borrowed pens, needed help finding buildings, wanted to know what time something started, or stopped you because they thought you might know the answer to a question. I was Chinese, and I guess that was obvious enough from how I looked or maybe from something I had been doing at the time. I do not remember exactly where I was when it happened. It might have been on campus, near a coffee shop, outside a building, or somewhere people passed through regularly. I only remember being by myself. A woman came over to me. She looked like she was in her 30s, maybe a little younger or older, but definitely older than me. She was not acting loud or aggressive. She did not look like she was trying to scare me. At first, she just seemed like someone who needed help with something. She asked whether I could translate something for her. Or maybe she had a question about something written in Chinese. It has been a long time, so I do not remember the exact details. I wish I did, because I think that would make the whole situation easier to understand. But the beginning was ordinary enough that I did not pay close attention. It was not like I immediately thought, this is strange. It started as a normal request from a stranger. She had something with her, maybe a note, a phrase, or some writing she wanted help understanding. I remember looking at it and trying to answer her. I do not remember whether the Chinese was handwritten, printed, or copied from something else. I do not remember whether it was a sentence, a name, a symbol, or some kind of message. What I do remember is that the questions became strange. At first, I thought she just needed language help. Then she started asking things that did not feel connected to translation anymore. They were not necessarily threatening questions. She was not screaming at me or demanding anything. But the conversation went in a direction that made me feel uncertain. It was like she was asking personal things, or asking me to explain things that did not make sense in the context of a translation. I remember trying to be polite, because that was how I was back then. I was young, and I did not want to be rude. I did not want to assume someone had bad intentions just because they were acting a little strange. If somebody seemed confused or needed help, I usually tried to answer them. That is how I ended up staying in the conversation longer than I probably should have. The woman had a small notebook with her. It was not a large notebook or a school notebook. It was one of those little notebooks that someone can carry in a bag or pocket. I remember her asking me to write something in it in my own handwriting. At the time, I did not think much of it. Maybe she wanted a Chinese phrase written correctly. Maybe she wanted me to write a translation down so she could keep it. Maybe she wanted my help with characters she could not copy properly herself. That seemed reasonable enough. If someone does not know Chinese and wants a phrase written down, they might ask a person who does to write it for them. I remember taking the notebook and writing something in it. I do not remember exactly what I wrote. That is one of the things that bothers me now. I remember using my own handwriting. I remember writing in her little notebook. I remember handing it back to her. But I cannot remember the words. I cannot remember whether it was a translation, a name, a sentence, or some characters she requested. I only remember that it felt strange later, after I thought about the whole conversation again. At some point, I also told her my name and my birthday. Again, at the time, I was young and did not see why it would matter. Maybe she asked in a casual way. Maybe the conversation had drifted into something personal, and I answered without thinking. College students talk to strangers more openly than they realize. You meet people in class, in dorms, at events, in line for food, and in random places on campus. You get used to answering harmless questions. What is your name? Where are you from? What year are you in? When is your birthday? Those can sound like normal getting to know you questions. But this woman was not someone I knew. She was not a classmate. She was not a friend of a friend. She was just a stranger who had originally approached me about Chinese writing. I remember giving her my information because I did not think about it carefully enough. I did not stop and ask why she needed it. I did not wonder why someone asking for a translation needed my name or birthday. I did not think, why does she need my handwriting? I just answered. Then eventually, the interaction ended. She left. I went on with my day. At the time, I probably forgot about it quickly. It was weird, but not weird enough for me to call anyone or report it. I did not think I had been scammed. I did not think I was in danger. I did not feel like she had threatened me or taken anything from me. It was just an uncomfortable conversation with a stranger that had ended. But later, I told a friend about it. I do not remember whether I told my friend that same day or days later. Maybe I was joking about how odd the woman had been. Maybe I mentioned the notebook and said I had no idea why she wanted me to write in it. Maybe I told my friend that the stranger had asked my birthday and that it felt kind of off in hindsight. My friend listened and then said something that made the whole memory much worse. She said those were the main things someone would need to put a curse on me. My name, my birth date, my handwriting. Maybe the exact wording was different. Maybe she said those things could be used for some kind of curse, spell, ritual, or bad energy. But that was the message I took from it. My friend made it sound like I had accidentally handed over everything a stranger would need if they wanted to do something spiritual or supernatural against me. And suddenly, the whole encounter felt different. Before that conversation with my friend, I had thought the woman was just odd. Afterward, I started wondering whether she had been trying to do something to me. It sounds silly when I say it now, especially because I do not know whether I believe in curses. I am not someone who normally walks around thinking strangers are putting spells on me. I do not see a bad day and assume it happened because somebody wrote my name in a notebook. But once someone gives you an idea like that, it can stay in your head, especially when the interaction already felt strange. I started replaying the details. Why did she approach me specifically? Why did she ask about Chinese writing? Why did she need my handwriting instead of just typing something into her phone or writing it herself? Why did she ask my name? Why did she ask my birthday? Why did she have a little notebook ready? Why did the questions feel so strange even though I could not remember them clearly afterward? The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I felt. I would remember the notebook first. I could picture it in my mind, even though I could not remember what was written inside. I could remember the feeling of holding it, the way she asked me to write something down, and the thought that I had put my own handwriting on a page that belonged to a stranger. Then I would remember telling her my name and birth date. Those things are not secret in the way a password is secret. Your name is something you give people all the time. Birthdays come up in casual conversation constantly. But together, in the context of someone acting strange and taking notes, they began to feel more personal than they had in the moment. I kept wondering what she had written down after I left. Maybe she had simply written the translation I gave her. Maybe she wanted a phrase in Chinese for a tattoo, a gift, a letter, or a personal project. Maybe she was interested in Chinese culture and did not know anyone else to ask. Maybe she was practicing something, researching something, or trying to understand a message she had found. Maybe the weird questions only seemed weird because she was socially awkward or nervous. There are many normal explanations. People can be strange without being dangerous. People can ask too many personal questions because they have bad social boundaries. Someone might carry a notebook because they like writing things down. They might ask for handwriting because they want to see how a language looks when written naturally by a native speaker. That would make sense. But the part that still gets to me is that I do not remember what I wrote. If I remembered writing something harmless, maybe I would never think about it again. If I remembered writing, "Hello, how are you?" or some basic phrase like that, the whole encounter would probably feel ordinary now. Instead, there is a blank space in my memory. I know I wrote something. I know she asked me to use my own handwriting. I know I gave her personal information. And I know I walked away feeling vaguely uncomfortable without understanding why. That kind of memory can grow over time. The less you remember, the more room there is for your mind to fill in the missing pieces. Every time I thought about it, the strange parts got louder. The questions I could not remember became more suspicious. The notebook became more important. My friend's comment about a curse became harder to ignore. Then, if something unpleasant happened in my life afterward, even something normal, a small part of me would think about that woman. Maybe I had a run of bad luck. Maybe I had an argument with someone. Maybe I failed a test, lost something important, got sick, or had a stressful week. I would not truly believe it was because of a curse, but the thought would pass through my mind anyway. What if she did something? What if that was why she needed my name? What if that was why she asked my birthday? What if writing in the notebook mattered somehow? It is funny in a dark way because the more logical part of me knows that life has random bad days. Everyone has them. A bad week does not mean somebody put a curse on you. A stranger asking for help does not automatically mean they had some hidden plan. And I know there are traditions and beliefs around names, dates of birth, handwriting, and personal objects. But that does not mean every odd stranger is practicing something harmful. Still, fear does not always listen to logic. Once a situation gets attached to the idea of a curse, it becomes difficult to look at it normally again. I have wondered whether the woman knew I was Chinese and approached me because she genuinely needed help with the language. That may have been all it was. Maybe she had a Chinese phrase that she wanted translated. Maybe she did not know anyone else who could read it. Maybe she was grateful that I stopped to help her. Maybe the strange questions were not even that strange, and I only remember them that way now because I was uncomfortable afterward. Memory does that too. A conversation that felt mildly off in the moment can become much stranger years later. You remember the feeling more clearly than the words. You remember the notebook, the personal questions, and the fact that you did not understand why you were being asked. But you lose the context that might have made it harmless. That is why I cannot say for sure that anything supernatural happened. I do not know who she was. I do not know what she wanted. I do not know what I wrote. I do not know why she asked my name and birth date. And I definitely do not know whether she believed in curses, rituals, or anything like that. For all I know, she may not have thought anything of it after she walked away. She may have used the translation for something completely ordinary and forgotten about me within an hour. I may have been just one helpful student she met that day. But I never forgot her. Even now, I sometimes think about the encounter and laugh a little because of how young and naive I was. I was so willing to help. A stranger came over with a notebook, asked me questions, asked me to write something down, and asked for personal information, and I just answered because I did not want to be rude. I was young and dumb. Or maybe I was just kind. There is a difference. Being helpful is not necessarily stupid. Wanting to help someone translate something in a language you know is not a bad thing. Giving someone your name in a casual conversation is not automatically dangerous. But I learned afterward that it is okay to set boundaries, even when someone seems harmless. It is okay to ask why someone needs your information. It is okay to say you are not comfortable writing something down. It is okay to walk away from a conversation that starts feeling strange. At the time, I did not know that. Now I do. But that does not stop the memory from coming back sometimes. I still picture the woman in her 30s. I still picture the small notebook. I still remember the feeling that the questions had become strange. I still remember writing something in my own handwriting. And I still remember telling her my name and birth date without thinking much about it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a weird interaction with a stranger. Maybe my friend's comment turned an awkward memory into a much scarier one. Or maybe there was something about that woman that I picked up on before I had the words to explain it. I honestly do not know. But every once in a while, even years later, I think about her and wonder what she wrote in that little notebook after I walked away. When I was in middle school, my mom was driving my sister and me to school one morning when all three of us saw something in the sky that none of us have ever been able to explain. It was a normal school morning at first. We were probably running a little late, like most families do sometimes. My mom was driving, my sister and I were half awake in the back or passenger seats, and we were heading towards school the same way we had done so many times before. There was nothing unusual about the weather that I remember. It was just morning, people were going to work, kids were being dropped off at school, and everything felt ordinary. Then we saw it. It was over the area, near our school. The best way I can describe it is that it looked like a huge spaceship, but it also looked like a floating building. It was enormous, not something small in the distance that could have been a plane, a helicopter, or a weird cloud. It looked solid. It looked massive. It seemed to hang over the area in a way that made it impossible to ignore. All three of us saw it at the same time. I remember the car getting quiet. My mom saw it. My sister saw it. I saw it. None of us had to point it out to the others because we were all already staring. It was one of those moments where something so strange happens that nobody knows what to say first. You do not immediately scream or start asking questions. Your brain just stops for a second because what you are looking at does not fit into anything normal. It was too big. That is the part I keep coming back to. It did not look like a distant airplane. It did not look like a blimp. It did not look like some advertising balloon or weather equipment. It looked like this huge object suspended over the area near the school, almost like a building had somehow been lifted into the sky and was just floating there. The shape is hard to explain now because it has been so many years, but I remember it having a structure to it. It did not seem round and simple like the classic picture people imagine when they hear the word UFO. It was larger and stranger than that. It looked more like a floating structure, something with size, weight, and form, something that should not have been able to stay in the air. And it was just there. For what felt like a very long time, nobody moved. The weirdest thing was the way time seemed to stop. I do not know if it literally did, obviously. I know that sounds impossible. But that is what it felt like. We were all sitting in the car looking at this huge thing over the school area, and it seemed like we were stuck there forever. We were not talking. We were not driving. We were not thinking about school anymore. Everything else disappeared. It felt like we watched it for around 30 minutes. That could not have been the actual amount of time, at least not in a normal sense. If we had truly been sitting in the car for 30 minutes staring at something over the school, we would have been extremely late. Other cars would have been stopping. People would have been getting out. There would have been panic. There would have been more reports. But the way we remember it, it felt long. Much longer than it should have. It was like the moment stretched. We stared at it. The object stayed there. The world around us felt frozen. I remember being afraid, but not in the kind of fear where you want to run away immediately. It was more like being stunned. I was in middle school. I did not have any way to understand what I was seeing. I knew it was not normal, but I did not know what category to put it in. I did not know whether it was dangerous. I did not know whether it was military, some kind of weird weather event, a giant machine, or something completely impossible. I only knew it was in the sky, and it was huge. My mom did not freak out the way someone might in a movie. She did not start screaming or driving wildly. We were all just looking at it. I think the shock made us quiet. Sometimes when something feels unreal, your mind refuses to react properly because it is still trying to decide whether you are actually seeing it. I remember looking at my sister. She was staring, too. That mattered to me even then. If I had been the only one who saw it, I might have assumed I had imagined it. Maybe I would have thought I was tired, daydreaming, or seeing something strange in the clouds. But my mom saw it. My sister saw it. We all watched the same thing. And later, we all remembered it in almost the same way. At some point, the traffic light changed. The light turned green. It was like that small, normal thing snapped the world back into place. My mom started driving again, and the object was gone. Not slowly disappearing behind clouds, not flying away, not drifting over the horizon. It was simply no longer there. One moment, it was this huge floating structure over the area near the school. Then the light changed. Then we moved. Then it was gone. I remember looking back or trying to keep watching it through the car windows, but there was nothing to see. The sky looked normal. The area near the school looked normal. There was no giant object, no strange building in the air, no huge shape moving away in the distance. Just morning traffic and the school day beginning. My mom took us to school. That part is strange to me, too. We still went to school. We did not turn around and go home. We did not go to the police. We did not stop somewhere to talk about it. We just continued with the day, like people do when they do not know what else to do. I think maybe all of us were still trying to convince ourselves that there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was something in the clouds. Maybe it was a strange reflection. Maybe there was some kind of construction crane, billboard, or large object that only looked like it was floating. Maybe we had all misunderstood the same thing. But none of those explanations felt right. When we got to school, I remember feeling weird all day. It was hard to sit in class and pretend everything was normal after seeing something like that. I kept thinking about it. I kept wondering whether anyone else had seen it. I wanted to ask people, but I also did not want them to laugh at me or think I was making something up. Then, I heard other people mention it. Not everyone. It was not like the whole school was in chaos. There were not teachers gathering students outside. There were not police cars everywhere, and there was no announcement saying something had been seen in the sky. But a couple of people mentioned seeing something strange that morning. That made the experience feel more real. I remember hearing people talk about a huge object or weird lights near the school area. It was not exactly the same kind of detailed conversation that my family had about it, but enough people seemed to have noticed something that I stopped thinking it was only in my head. That night, there was apparently a small report about it on the news. Not a huge breaking news story. Not something that stayed on television for hours. More like a minor local mention. I do not remember every word of it, but I remember feeling relieved that it had been acknowledged at all. The fact that it was mentioned on the news made me think, okay, something really happened. We were not the only ones who saw something. Maybe there would be an explanation. But I never heard one. There was no clear answer about what the object was. No reports saying it was a weather balloon. No reports saying it was a military aircraft. No reports saying it was a large advertising display, a drone, a reflection, or an optical illusion. At least, not that I ever found. Over the years, my mom, my sister, and I have talked about it from time to time. Every time we do, the same thing happens. We all feel strange. It is difficult to describe. It almost feels dreamlike, like something happened that was real enough to remember, but weird enough that your mind does not want to accept it as real. We all have the same basic story. My mom was driving. My sister and I were in the car. We saw something huge floating over the school area. It looked like a spaceship or a building in the sky. Time felt wrong. The light changed. It disappeared. None of us has ever said, no, that did not happen. None of us has said, I think I imagined it. We all remember it. But we also all feel unsettled by it. It is like remembering a dream that someone else had with you. You know the details. You know the emotions. You know where you were. But the memory has a strange distance to it, as if it happened in a different version of the morning. That is what makes it so hard to talk about. If only one person had remembered it, it would be easy to dismiss. If it had only been me, I could say maybe I saw something in the sky as a kid, and my imagination turned it into a giant spaceship. Children do that. They see shapes in clouds, reflections on windows, aircraft at strange angles, or bright lights through haze, and their minds create something bigger. But my mom saw it. My sister saw it. Other people at school mentioned something too. There was even a minor report on the news. So what was it? I have looked for it over the years. I have searched UFO report registries. I have tried different words. I have looked for local sightings. I have searched for reports from the town, the school area, the year, and the time period. I have tried typing in descriptions like huge floating object over school, UFO seen near school, large spaceship over city, and other versions of the same memory. Nothing ever comes up. That is almost more frustrating than having no explanation at all. You would think something that huge would have been reported. You would think there would be multiple witnesses, articles, old newspaper records, local forums, somebody's photograph, or some kind of archived story. It was over an area near a school. It was morning. It was visible enough that my mom, my sister, and I all saw it from the car. Other students seemed to have seen something. A news report mentioned it. But when I searched for it, it is like it never happened. No official record, no registry entry, no clear archive, no explanation. Nothing. I have wondered if the news report was too minor to be saved anywhere. Maybe it was only a quick local segment that never got archived. Maybe nobody filed an official report. Maybe people saw something but decided it was not worth mentioning. Maybe the adults around us had an explanation that never made it back to us as kids. Maybe everyone simply forgot. That is possible. People see strange things all the time and do not report them. They assume someone else will. They tell a friend, laugh about it, and move on. A local station may mention something briefly, then never bring it up again. Years later, the records are gone, the clip is unavailable, and all that remains is a memory. But that still does not explain what we saw. I have tried to think of every normal possibility. Could it have been a blimp? Maybe, but it did not look like a blimp. It did not have that rounded shape. It looked too big and too structured. Could it have been a plane? No, it did not move like a plane, and it seemed far too large. It was not crossing the sky. It was hanging over one area. Could it have been a helicopter? No, there was no sound I remember, no visible rotors, and it looked much too huge. Could it have been a weather balloon? Maybe from a distance, but again, it did not seem like a small object in the sky. It looked like something enormous, something with the outline of a building. Could it have been a cloud formation? That is possible in theory. Clouds can create weird shapes, especially in certain light. But the way it seemed to float over the school area and then disappear the moment the traffic light changed does not feel like a cloud in my memory. Could it have been a reflection in the windshield? Maybe. Windshields can reflect dashboard lights, buildings, cars, or other objects. But my mom, my sister, and I all saw it as if it was outside. Other people at school mentioned it. That makes the reflection explanation feel weak. Could it have been a dream? That is the strangest possibility because all three of us remember it. I do not know how three people in the same car could share the same dream, then arrive at school, then hear other people talking about something similar, then see a minor report about it later that night. So I do not think it was a dream, but I understand why it feels like one. The time issue is what bothers me most. I remember looking at that object for what felt like 30 minutes. My mom remembers it feeling much longer than it should have. My sister remembers the same strange, stretched-out moment. But the real world did not seem to react as if we had been stopped for half an hour. The traffic light changed. We drove on. We got to school. The morning continued. Maybe it only lasted a few seconds. Maybe fear and shock made it feel longer. That happens. A car accident can take 2 seconds, but feel like a full minute. A person can see something alarming and remember every detail because their brain slows the moment down afterward. Maybe that is what happened. Maybe we saw it for only a short time, but because we were all staring at something impossible, our memories turned that brief moment into something much longer. That would make sense. But even if it only lasted seconds, what was it? Why did it look like a huge floating building? Why did it vanish? Why did other people talk about it? Why did the news mention it? Why is there no record now? Those are the questions I still cannot answer. Every now and then, my mom, my sister, or I will bring it up. It usually happens during a conversation about childhood memories, weird things we saw growing up, or old local stories. Someone will say, "Do you remember that thing over the school?" Then all three of us know exactly what they mean. We remember the car. We remember the morning. We remember the object. We remember the strange silence. We remember the light changing. We remember the object disappearing. And each time, we get that same uncomfortable feeling. Not exactly fear, more like confusion mixed with disbelief. Like we are all holding the same memory, but it does not belong anywhere. It does not fit into our normal lives. It does not fit into a news story, a report, or a logical explanation. It is just there, sitting in the past, as clear as any other childhood memory, and yet impossible to place. Maybe one day I will find an old report. Maybe someone else will post about seeing the same thing. Maybe there's a local newspaper clipping somewhere, a lost video recording, or an old forum post buried online. Maybe it had a completely ordinary explanation that nobody thought was important enough to preserve. Or maybe it was one of those things that people see, remember, and never fully understand. I do not know what it was. I do not know whether it was a UFO. I do not know whether it was a military craft, an atmospheric effect, a strange reflection, or something else entirely. But I know 3 people in one car saw it. I know other people mentioned seeing something that day. I know there was a small report on the news, and I know that whenever my family talks about it, we all tell the same story. A huge, floating, building-like shape over the area near our school. Time seeming to stop. The traffic light changing. And then, nothing. Here is the rewrite. When I was in middle school, my mom was driving my sister and me to school one morning when all 3 of us saw something in the sky that none of us have ever been able to explain. It was a normal school morning at first. We were probably running a little late, like most families do sometimes. My mom was driving, my sister and I were half awake in the back or passenger seats. And we were heading toward school the same way we had done so many times before. There was nothing unusual about the weather that I remember. It was just morning, people were going to work, kids were being dropped off at school, and everything felt ordinary. Then we saw it. It was over the area near our school. The best way I can describe it is that it looked like a huge spaceship, but it also looked like a floating building. It was enormous, not something small in the distance that could have been a plane, a helicopter, or a weird cloud. It looked solid. It looked massive. It seemed to hang over the area in a way that made it impossible to ignore. All 3 of us saw it at the same time. I remember the car getting quiet. My mom saw it. My sister saw it. I saw it. None of us had to point it out to the others because we were all already staring. It was one of those moments where something so strange happens that nobody knows what to say first. You do not immediately scream or start asking questions. Your brain just stops for a second because what you are looking at does not fit into anything normal. It was too big. That is the part I keep coming back to. It did not look like a distant airplane. It did not look like a blimp. It did not look like some advertising balloon or weather equipment. It looked like this huge object suspended over the area near the school, almost like a building, had somehow been lifted into the sky and was just floating there. The shape is hard to explain now because it has been so many years, but I remember it having a structure to it. It did not seem round and simple like the classic picture people imagine when they hear the word UFO. It was larger and stranger than that. It looked more like a floating structure, something with size, weight, and form. Something that should not have been able to stay in the air. And it was just there. For what felt like a very long time, nobody moved. The weirdest thing was the way time seemed to stop. I do not know if it literally did, obviously. I know that sounds impossible. But that is what it felt like. We were all sitting in the car looking at this huge thing over the school area, and it seemed like we were stuck there forever. We were not talking. We were not driving. We were not thinking about school anymore. Everything else disappeared. It felt like we watched it for around 30 minutes. That could not have been the actual amount of time, at least not in a normal sense. If we had truly been sitting in the car for 30 minutes, staring at something over the school, we would have been extremely late. Other cars would have been stopping. People would have been getting out. There would have been panic. There would have been more reports. But the way we remember it, it felt long, much longer than it should have. It was like the moment stretched. We stared at it. The object stayed there. The world around us felt frozen. I remember being afraid, but not in the kind of fear where you want to run away immediately. It was more like being stunned. I was in middle school. I did not have any way to understand what I was seeing. I knew it was not normal, but I did not know what category to put it in. I did not know whether it was dangerous. I did not know whether it was military, some kind of weird weather event, a giant machine, or something completely impossible. I only knew it was in the sky. And it was huge. My mom did not freak out the way someone might in a movie. She did not start screaming or driving wildly. We were all just looking at it. I think the shock made us quiet. Sometimes when something feels unreal, your mind refuses to react properly because it is still trying to decide whether you are actually seeing it. I remember looking at my sister. She was staring too. That mattered to me even then. If I had been the only one who saw it, I might have assumed I had imagined it. Maybe I would have thought I was tired, daydreaming, or seeing something strange in the clouds. But my mom saw it. My sister saw it. We all watched the same thing. And later, we all remembered it in almost the same way. At some point, the traffic light changed. The light turned green. It was like that small, normal thing snapped the world back into place. My mom started driving again, and the object was gone. Not slowly disappearing behind clouds, not flying away, not drifting over the horizon. It was simply no longer there. One moment, it was this huge floating structure over the area near the school. Then the light changed. Then we moved. Then it was gone. I remember looking back or trying to keep watching it through the car windows, but there was nothing to see. The sky looked normal. The area near the school looked normal. There was no giant object, no strange building in the air, no huge shape moving away in the distance, just morning traffic and the school day beginning. My mom took us to school. That part is strange to me, too. We still went to school. We did not turn around and go home. We did not go to the police. We did not stop somewhere to talk about it. We just continued with the day like people do when they do not know what else to do. I think maybe all of us were still trying to convince ourselves that there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was something in the clouds. Maybe it was a strange reflection. Maybe there was some kind of construction crane, billboard, or large object that only looked like it was floating. Maybe we had all misunderstood the same thing. But none of those explanations felt right. When we got to school, I remember feeling weird all day. It was hard to sit in class and pretend everything was normal after seeing something like that. I kept thinking about it. I kept wondering whether anyone else had seen it. I wanted to ask people, but I also did not want them to laugh at me or think I was making something up. Then I heard other people mention it. Not everyone. It was not like the whole school was in chaos. There were not teachers gathering students outside. There were not police cars everywhere, and there was no announcement saying something had been seen in the sky. But a couple of people mentioned seeing something strange that morning. That made the experience feel more real. I remember hearing people talk about a huge object or weird lights near the school area. It was not exactly the same kind of detailed conversation that my family had about it, but enough people seemed to have noticed something that I stopped thinking it was only in my head. That night, There was apparently a small report about it on the news. Not a huge breaking news story. Not something that stayed on television for hours, more like a minor local mention. I do not remember every word of it, but I remember feeling relieved that it had been acknowledged at all. The fact that it was mentioned on the news made me think, okay, something really happened. We were not the only ones who saw something. Maybe there would be an explanation. But I never heard one. There was no clear answer about what the object was. No reports saying it was a weather balloon. No reports saying it was a military aircraft. No reports saying it was a large advertising display, a drone, a reflection, or an optical illusion. At least, not that I ever found. Over the years, my mom, my sister, and I have talked about it from time to time. Every time we do, the same thing happens. We all feel strange. It is difficult to describe. It almost feels dreamlike, like something happened that was real enough to remember, but weird enough that your mind does not want to accept it as real. We all have the same basic story. My mom was driving, my sister and I were in the car. We saw something huge floating over the school area. It looked like a spaceship or a building in the sky. Time felt wrong. The light changed. It disappeared. None of us has ever said, no, that did not happen. None of us has said, I think I imagined it. We all remember it. But we also all feel unsettled by it. It is like remembering a dream that someone else had with you. You know the details. You know the emotions. You know where you were. But the memory has a strange distance to it, as if it happened in a different version of the morning. That is what makes it so hard to talk about. If only one person had remembered it, it would be easy to dismiss. If it had only been me, I could say maybe I saw something in the sky as a kid and my imagination turned it into a giant spaceship. Children do that. They see shapes in clouds, reflections on windows, aircraft at strange angles, or bright lights through haze, and their minds create something bigger. But my mom saw it. My sister saw it. Other people at school mentioned something too. There was even a minor report on the news. So what was it? I have looked for it over the years. I have searched UFO report registries. I have tried different words. I have looked for local sightings. I have searched for reports from the town, the school area, the year, and the time period. I have tried typing in descriptions like huge floating object over school, UFO seen near school, large spaceship over city, and other versions of the same memory. Nothing ever comes up. That is almost more frustrating than having no explanation at all. You would think something that huge would have been reported. You would think there would be multiple witnesses, articles, old newspaper records, local forums, somebody's photograph, or some kind of archived story. It was over an area near a school. It was morning. It was visible enough that my mom, my sister, and I all saw it from the car. Other students seemed to have seen something. A news report mentioned it. But when I search for it, it is like it never happened. No official record, no registry entry, no clear archive, no explanation. Nothing. I have wondered if the news report was too minor to be saved anywhere. Maybe it was only a quick local segment that never got archived. Maybe nobody filed an official report. Maybe people saw something but decided it was not worth mentioning. Maybe the adults around us had an explanation that never made it back to us as kids. Maybe everyone simply forgot. That is possible. People see strange things all the time and do not report them. They assume someone else will. They tell a friend, laugh about it, and move on. A local station may mention something briefly, then never bring it up again. Years later, the records are gone, the clip is unavailable, and all that remains is a memory. But that still does not explain what we saw. I have tried to think of every normal possibility. Could it have been a blimp? maybe. But it did not look like a blimp. It did not have that rounded shape. It looked too big and too structured. Could it have been a plane? No, it did not move like a plane, and it seemed far too large. It was not crossing the sky. It was hanging over one area. Could it have been a helicopter? No, there was no sound, I remember, no visible rotors, and it looked much too huge. Could it have been a weather balloon? Maybe from a distance. But again, it did not seem like a small object in the sky. It looked like something enormous, something with the outline of a building. Could it have been a cloud formation? That is possible in theory. Clouds can create weird shapes, especially in certain light. But the way it seemed to float over the school area and then disappear the moment the traffic light changed does not feel like a cloud in my memory. Could it have been a reflection in the windshield? Maybe windshields can reflect dashboard lights, buildings, cars, or other objects. But my mom, my sister, and I all saw it as if it was outside. Other people at school mentioned it. That makes the reflection explanation feel weak. Could it have been a dream? That is the strangest possibility because all three of us remember it. I do not know how three people in the same car could share the same dream, then arrive at school, then hear other people talking about something similar, then see a minor report about it later that night. So I do not think it was a dream, but I understand why it feels like one. The time issue is what bothers me most. I remember looking at that object for what felt like 30 minutes. My mom remembers it feeling much longer than it should have. My sister remembers the same strange, stretched-out moment. But the real world did not seem to react as if we had been stopped for half an hour. The traffic light changed. We drove on. We got to school. The morning continued. Maybe it only lasted a few seconds. Maybe fear and shock made it feel longer. That happens. A car accident can take 2 seconds, but feel like a full minute. A person can see something alarming and remember every detail because their brain slows the moment down afterward. Maybe that is what happened. Maybe we saw it for only a short time, but because we were all staring at something impossible, our memories turned that brief moment into something much longer. That would make sense. But even if it only lasted seconds, what was it? Why did it look like a huge floating building? Why did it vanish? Why did other people talk about it? Why did the news mention it? Why is there no record now? Those are the questions I still cannot answer. Every now and then, my mom, my sister, or I will bring it up. It usually happens during a conversation about childhood memories, weird things we saw growing up, or old local stories. Someone will say, "Do you remember that thing over the school?" Then all three of us know exactly what they mean. We remember the car. We remember the morning. We remember the object. We remember the strange silence. We remember the light changing. We remember the object disappearing. And each time, we get that same uncomfortable feeling. Not exactly fear, more like confusion mixed with disbelief. Like we are all holding the same memory, but it does not belong anywhere. It does not fit into our normal lives. It does not fit into a news story, a report, or a logical explanation. It is just there, sitting in the past, as clear as any other childhood memory, and yet impossible to place. Maybe one day I will find an old report. Maybe someone else will post about seeing the same thing. Maybe there is a local newspaper, clipping somewhere, a lost video recording, or an old forum post buried online. Maybe it had a completely ordinary explanation that nobody thought was important enough to preserve. Or maybe it was one of those things that people see, remember, and never fully understand. I do not know what it was. I do not know whether it was a UFO. I do not know whether it was a military craft, an atmospheric effect, a strange reflection, or something else entirely. But I know 3 people in one car saw it. I know other people mentioned seeing something that day. I know there was a small report on the news, and I know that whenever my family talks about it, we all tell the same story. A huge floating building-like shape over the area near our school. Time seeming to stop, the traffic light changing. And then nothing.
So that's where we'll stop tonight. Before you go, remember this. Every story you just heard was real. Real people, real nights, and none of them saw it coming. If that got to you the way it gets to most people, do one thing before you leave. Hit subscribe. I post new stories all the time, and I don't want you to miss them. Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.